Look at this. We're so fortunate to be here. Thank you all so much. As Paul said, yes, I'm Siobhán, and to my left here I have Naoimh, then I have Zach, and I have Maeve, and I have John, just so you know who we all are. I'm just delighted to be here to be talking about the talent of tomorrow. And I suppose I should warn you a bit in advance, if you're expecting a very formal, professional interview, they've chosen the wrong people for this. We've been getting on very well. I'm glad our mics weren't turned on back in the green room. So you can enjoy our chat as we discuss this topic today. But starting with this topic, and we're delighted to have this as the first panel discussion today, the talent of tomorrow. So why is that an important topic for us to be discussing? Like, why is that the first subject that we're discussing as a panel? Maeve, I'm going to go to you first to open up our discussion.
Thanks, Siobhán. I think, if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's the whole world of work has changed. We're hearing all these things about the great resignation, the war for talent, and I think people, how they work have changed, their values have changed, their priorities have changed, and they really want something different. So I think even how we're working today, as in actually today, is going to be different to how we're working next year. So I think it's really important. I think employers, for sure, need to be looking at what the talent of tomorrow need and want if they want to remain competitive.
That makes sense, and because even in our discussions for this, we were talking about what we wanted even from the panel was different from what we might have wanted in the past. And like Zach, you were saying about how what we expect from our work is different. Do you want to elaborate on that?
And I also want to add further that we live in such a interconnected world now where there's people from all different race, different background, culture, and at the end of the day, yes, we're in an organizational context, but we should keep in mind we're working with one another as human beings, and therefore having something like a strategic framework that highlights components such as policy development, internal and external engagement, or learning and development is crucial because we want to also highlight what we're doing and where we want to go. So therefore, including metrics, measurable metrics to identify how we are progressing is also very important. And that should be the bottom line where what we deserve as well going into any industry.
That makes sense. And so do we think then the talent of tomorrow, do you think that they expect something different as a minimum when they're coming into the workforce?
Definitely. We've transitioned from, as a community, being like, oh, we're tolerated, that's absolutely fine. We're now at the point where acceptance is the absolute bare minimum. And it's supporting ourselves in the workplace, companies helping us create community through societies and equality working groups, and allowing pronoun badges, having a gender-neutral bathroom in the workplace. Smaller businesses, taking the opportunity to just have a conversation among your staff about acceptance in the workplace and just making places as friendly as possible, and that should be reflected in our legislation as well. The Equality Status Act needs to go a bit further. If you check out the annual report for the Irish Human Rights Equality Commission 2021, you'll see how many people called about employment rights problems. And yeah, Ireland has been such a leader around equality matters, with the Gender Recognition Act and the Marriage Equality Referendum of 2015. Where Ireland leads, let the world follow. So we should really continue to be leaders in acceptance in the workplace.
Absolutely. Even to that point then as well, from David's speech there, he was saying, we need to create an environment and challenge ourselves. And it takes a village, people. You can't just have one person pushing that. So I suppose it's really opening our minds and making sure that we are inclusive to all other kind of people from different backgrounds and continuous development, basically, because it's a natural human instinct to challenge and continuously drive continuous development. So I suppose it's with the workplace we need to move with the times as well there, for sure.
No, that makes sense. So then, if they're thinking of how do we create those safe, inclusive spaces, what do we think the talent of tomorrow, even when they're looking at prospective employers, what would they even want to see advertised?
I think, going back to highlighting all those key different components that I discussed earlier, there's that component, but then, we always ask what the organization is doing. They can create the wonderful, engaged and safe environment, but we also should ask ourselves, when we do get involved in an organization, what do we want to contribute? Because it takes two to really engage and make things happen and really break down barrier. So like as a person of color, I pretty much in any situation I get involved in and then say, well, there's no culture events in this component for Asian. I don't sit around and wait. I know that the organization will support. We got to stand up and get involved as well, and taking that initiative in our own hand. Because, say, for example, what we're doing today. Some of us would like to attend and show our presence within an event like this, which is brilliant because it shows that DNI or DEI or whichever one you want to prefer, it matters. Or you want to even engage on a higher level where join a committee, take a leadership role. So I think it's also about identifying what the organization is doing, but then also what we as individuals can do and contribute to the organization and the wider community as well.
Yeah, I think people want to see that strategic alignment. I think that's a very fancy word for saying they want to see that people or the organization is kind of doing things for them so that they feel valued, that they can come to work and be their true self. And like, let's face it, if it's not kind of in the strategy of the organisation, then, it's maybe ad hoc or piecemeal. So kind of, I think maybe David said earlier about, not having that one person leading all the time, that it's like full cross-company buy-in.
Absolutely. I suppose it's so important to have companies that aren't just talking the talk, they're, actioning what they're saying and really wanting to make that an inclusive environment, having initiatives within the companies and within organizations to really kind of engage their employees and have that kind of symbiotic relationship where from the senior level down where they have a message to kind of put out, it's also from the lower level up or, that we want to create this environment to include people. I'll give a really good example from the Merck group. They began on one of their sites what's called a culture kitchen. So it's basically taking different cultures, they basically go to the canteen and people from all different backgrounds would basically meet up and they would teach other employees languages or they would introduce them to their different dishes or their delicacies or even idioms. So I think that that's really eye-opening because you can meet people you'd have never met before and teach them your language. And I think it really gives a different perspective for a lot of people and opens up a really inclusive environment there. So it's actions like that that we really need in companies to keep driving.
Okay, I love that.
I would like to also add on to what David had said in terms of from an employee or who's getting involved in an organization and then the engagement part. Don't be afraid to make mistake. Like as an ally, don't be afraid to say something wrong. We are people of courage living in an imperfect world. So then therefore mistake can happen. And therefore we got to learn from one another, engage and be fearless in wanting to learn and support one another.
And it's having that culture of open-mindedness in your workplace, that you will make mistakes, that we're all learning together. And it's also, having the initiatives to support LGBT people in the workplace and people of all sorts of diversity and minorities, whether you're a person of colour, you're disabled, or you're a woman who feels disempowered in the workplace, but it's also not standing for homophobia and transphobia in the workplace and making sure it's not swept under the carpet. We can spend as many days, putting up rainbow flags in the office, but as long as your human resources department might hide something or your trade union rep mightn't be allowed in the workplace to back you up when something happens, then what's the point? And if you have someone in the workplace, let's say Mick is in the background making comments, using bad words. Mick isn't using, sorry if anyone is called Mick in the audience. Mick keeps using language or misgendering someone. It's as a workplace making sure you're not going to take Mick's crap. And that we know that as a workplace, as an organisation, that you won't stand for that behaviour. Doesn't matter if Mick is, you can't change Mick. We can change Mick. Mick learned how to use WhatsApp for the first time last year. He can certainly change.
I do think it's important, though, the approach we take with that, because I think if you take an aggressive approach towards someone, it almost looks like it's radicalized. Like, no, you need to conform to what I'm saying here. It's about educating each other and, building that allyship there. It's, look, Mick, what you said there isn't really appropriate, but, I get your point. It mightn't be the point I like, but this, like, if you want to have a talk about it, I'm happy for discussion and opening the conversation, because I think if you go really harsh in, you're closing that conversation and Mick's taking that home with him. And he's like, I hate all people in that community, or all people from that race, or anything like that. So it's really kind of taking a step back and saying, I need to really be level-headed here and allow Mick to understand my perspective, or at least show my perspective.
I love that. And poor Mick, before he gets any more bashing. But you've touched on, I've heard lots of great points there already. It sounds like there is no one-size-fits-all approach, but there is a follow-up performance with action. So much as we love the beautiful Pride flags or the Pride logos, it's what's following that up. And you've given some good examples, but do you want to share any more about good practice? What would that look like for any of the companies out there that are watching today going, oh, I thought we were being inclusive. How can we be more if this is how we're supposed to attract the talent of tomorrow?
Absolutely. I think it's important to kind of look at your policies and kind of look from the internal out, because it's one thing to kind of say, we brand, we're going to put a rainbow flag or a rainbow symbol on our company and we're good to go. It's kind of looking internally and saying, what can we do to really kind of drive inclusivity here?
Yeah, because you can have diversity and not be inclusive.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's trying to get that right, isn't it?
Yeah.
You could have a high level of diversity on your team, and then people can, don't feel included, don't feel they're involved in the decision making, don't feel valued. So it's trying to strike that balance between diversity and inclusion.
And I think from an organization to an organization perspective, as we keep mentioning, there's no one size fits all, because, say for example, you could have a big multinational corporation who have billions of dollars and they can definitely invest into a huge program and so forth. But then what happened to the small and medium-sized company? But then that's why we live in one of the, I'm going to be a bit biased. I've been living here for a while, but we live in one of the best cities in the world, because if organizations don't have the resources, well, guess what? Cork gives you the resources. If you want to work in discussion in terms of LGBT matter, and you know what? There's Gay Cork Project there to support you. There's Link, and there's so many other resources across the board. And and if there isn't one, let's work together and actually move the ball ahead.
I love that. Sorry.
It is putting money where your mouth is, supporting these initiatives like the companies who've sponsored this event is such a big stride, because that's something that maybe wouldn't have happened in previous decades. But the fact that companies are willing to sponsor Pride events, that they're willing to invest in equality and diversity training, is just such a good step in the right direction. And Ireland is brilliant for that. But it's also looking at where your corporation's money is going and ensuring that it is going to sources that are, supporting LGBT communities, and those values transcend to every part of your company. But I just want to say thank you again to the people who helped make this event happen.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Definitely. And even to that point as well, it's kind of past Pride, it's even, we have the month of June, that's Pride, that represents the Stonewall riots and the protests. But we also, it's throughout the year we should be kind of having that inclusivity as well and working with that. So working with organizations like Belong To, who are really strong educators in the field of LGBTQIA plus rights, and kind of even bringing it back to basics. So companies can start from scratch. How do I make a more inclusive environment? And kind of going with these companies who are specialists in the field. I think that's really important as well.
I love this. You're already working through all the questions, so I don't even have to do anything. I just get to relax. So I was going to ask, what are some of the barriers? But you've already touched on some of them. But are there any other barriers? What's holding companies back from being as inclusive as possible?
Yeah, I think some of it is lack of education, lack of knowledge, fear of the unknown, fear of, like you were saying, Zach, getting it wrong, saying the wrong thing. Maybe actually not even recognising that it's something that they need to be involved in. I heard a good quote yesterday. I'm going to read it out because I'll get it wrong. And it said, an illusion unquestioned becomes your reality. And, obviously we were preparing for today and I was thinking, lots of people don't see that there's an issue. They don't recognise their own bias. They don't recognise that, oh, sure, that's not.
It's someone else's problem.
It's someone else's problem.
So how do we do that? How do we tackle some of these barriers? How do we help people overcome this?
Yeah, I think, partnerships is really, really important. And I know you were talking about some of the Pride networks earlier. But I mean, I think partnerships in terms of all the diversity, whether it's disability, race, the members of the travelling community, I think like there's so many good things, like you were saying, Zach, happening in Cork. There's so many good organisations. You don't have to know everything. Yes. You don't need to do everything on your own.
Okay,
you know, just partnering with
That's
those,
it. So often we kind of take on the pressure. We think we need to start from scratch and we need to produce something. But it sounds like actually there's already lots of great organisations and groups out there that we can draw wisdom from, draw lived experience from, and amplify their work, it sounds like.
Even though if we take it from an internal approach as well, it's listening to those who are part of these communities and who are part of these minorities as well. Even to Zach's point, you know, that it's just ask the question. Don't feel like you cannot ask the question, or don't feel like, you know, scared to say something. You know, we live in a world where cancel culture is there, and it's kind of getting past that. We cannot live in that world. It is not sustainable. It's not the right approach at all. So it's about listening to those who have those needs and, you know, are driving for ERG, so employee resource groups within companies as well, so that the resources are there and that there is a kind of, you know, an intersection between management in the company and the employees themselves.
I like that. It sounds like it touches back to your point about creating spaces where you're not putting an obligation on people to be educators, but you're creating an environment where people can volunteer to be educators.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe you touched on that as well. But not everyone wants to be an ambassador.
Yeah, not everyone wants to be the educator answering every single person like, what does the B stand for again? You don't want to be explaining that every day, and that's why it kind of needs to be more company culture and understanding so that you aren't being exhausted with parades of questions. But it is good that people have that curiosity, but it is making sure that you have those resources that you can kind of give to people. So you can be a signpost for people to go on their own educational journey to learn more about the LGBT community. So like Mick, I'm going to tell Mick to belong to his website.
Sorry,
Poor Mick. Poor Mick.
No, but that's great. So again, I'm hearing action over performance. I'm hearing there's no one answer, but any effort, any answer. Letting go of perfectionism, giving yourself permission to try, to fail, to get it wrong, to accept we will never have this all figured out. We are all learning, and we're all going to do that together. Okay. So I'm conscious of time, and I appreciate there's a busy schedule today. So I'm now going to ask, before we finish up today, what do you think? What one thing, as small or as big as you think, what one thing could organisations or people do to leave today? What could they do differently to be more inclusive in their organisations for this talent of tomorrow? What do we think? What's your one thing?
I've two, sorry.
Okay.
Already I'm going to break
At least one thing.
I think there's two main elements of this. I think you can be, you know, you can be a great employer, you can be inclusive, you can have a really diverse team, but actually I think our place brand, so Cork, I think has a really important role to play as well. I read another quote, I'm not all about quotes, but I saw this one as well and I just thought it was very relevant for today. Charles Landry, he's an international advisor on the future of cities. And he said 15 years ago, 80% of people said they would choose a company before the city. But today, 64% choose the city before they choose the company. I think that's a massive stat and something not to be ignored, actually. So I think, you know, City Council, all the stakeholders in Cork have a role to play in making Cork a really good and attractive offering. Nice. And then I think, obviously, the companies need to follow suit.
One small ask for the City Council.
Yeah, sure, you know, just something
one,
small.
fine.
Yeah.
Zach, over to you.
I got two as well.
I'm sorry.
Going back to having a strategic framework with measurable metrics to actually identify how we are progressing, where we are, and also where we're not progressing as well, and also tackling those issues. And the second point is cultivating an environment for success, because we can have the framework, we can have our point of views, but we also need to ensure that we want to have people as welcome as possible and also encourage them to succeed. Hold on, there goes my English. Fearlessly. There you go.
Thank you, Zach. Maeve?
For me, it would be sitting down with you and everyone you work with and just thinking about challenging your own unconscious bias and the assumptions you have about any communities that exist within your workplace, and just making sure that you're not operating on stereotypes and just doing your very best and being open to education.
I hope Mick is listening to that now.
Poor Mick. And David, just finish up with you.
I definitely think it's, you know, having the conversation with your colleagues. I suppose it's what is missing, or what can we do to really, drive continuous development? What can we do to make an environment more inclusive is the one thing. So it's whether it's, hold workshops where you start from basics, you open the floor to questions that you don't think you would have ever been able to get the answer to because you were too scared to ask. Yeah. I think it's so important that an employer allows that to happen so that, we're not having issues down the line where someone said the wrong thing or, someone took it too far. It's really just, listening to those around you and being able to know what resources you have there. Whether someone's shouting for an employee resource group, where someone's shouting for a policy change, it's listen to that. I think it's really important.
That is wonderful. Thank you all so much. You've shared some really helpful insights and also, I think, some practical actions that all of us can take away today. And the wonderful news is you're about to have a short break, so you can implement some of these actions right now by wandering around the room and having a chat and talking to people about how you can action some of these items when you go back to your organisation. And then I believe the next panel will be by my colleague Avril Hutch, Director of EDI in UCC, talking about the importance of EDI in the workplace. But can I just give a round of applause to my wonderful speakers here and the excellent presentation.